This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
This lecture goes through question 3 from the June 2013 exam. Before listening to the lecture, you are strongly recommended to download a copy of this exam from the ACCA website and to spend 5 or 10 minutes studying this question before we go through it and develop an approach to the answer. So if you haven't already done so, go and download the question and read it. Stop the recording until you've done that, and then when you've laid the preparation, come back and we'll go through the question together. Okay, as always, you should go to the requirements first to see what the question is about. And we go down to this one here, and it says, using Porter's 5 forces, assess the impact of the external business environment on the performance management of Stokeness, and give a justified recommendation of one new performance measure for each of the 5 forces of Stokeness. So it's Porter's 5 forces, which should be good news, because Porter's 5 forces is something you should be really familiar with from P3, as well as additional work you've done in looking at P5. And we should know what those are straight away. It's going to be rivals or competition. It's going to be the threat of new entrants. It's going to be the threat of substitutes. It is the threat coming from your customers. And it is supplier threat or supplier pressure. The question's got a kind of second little bit of it here in part A. It says, and give a justified recommendation for one new performance measure for each of the 5 forces. Now I find myself as a slightly odd terminology here, looking for a performance measure for each of the 5 forces. I think what it must be looking at is some way of assessing how strong each of these 5 forces is. Whether you call it a performance measure, I don't know. I think just a measure of the strength or the risk coming from each of these 5 forces is really what it wants. Second, discuss the problems of defining a market in measuring market share for Stokeness, and knowing what your market share is important in, say, techniques like Boston Consulting Group matrix, where one of the axes is relative market share. And finally, assess the risk appetite of venture capitalists and discuss how this might impact on performance measurement at Stokeness. Probably a slightly unusual question. It makes some use of maybe information from F9, where you'll be dealing with capitalists, venture capitalists, and you should have some idea of, in a way, how they make their money and what their attitude to risk and return is. But first of all, Porter's 5 forces. And what I suggest you do on this, since we know what we're looking for, we know the 5 things we're looking for, is as you read through this, you mark it off in the margin, on the line, whatever it's going to be, when you come across any of the 5 forces. Then you can find it easily again, or bring several threats of a new entry together again if needs be. So we'll read through it together and we'll mark where we think we come across a particular force. And then once we've got that later on, we can think how we might measure the strength and the danger which might be coming from that force. So Stokeness Engineering is developing hydrogen fuel cells for use in powering large motor vehicles such as buses and trucks. So it's large motor vehicles selling into a market where really there's the buses and trucks. I assume it's a manufacturer who's going to be buying these rather than the people who own the buses and trucks and so on here. So I would have thought that what we're really kind of dealing with here is some information about your customers. And it seemed to me that just thinking ahead a little bit, that there probably aren't that many customers. be a few major global suppliers of buses and trucks. So it would seem to me that maybe, even at this stage, we might think that the customer pressure here, the customer threat, is actually relatively high. But certainly the first two lines, we may have information that contradicts that. They will replace standard petrol or diesel engines. Fuel cells have a clear advantage over these older technologies, with lower carbon dioxide emissions. The governments of many developed countries are keen to see cuts in such emissions and are supportive of a variety of possible technological solutions to this, such as fuel cells, electrical batteries and compressed natural gas. So to some extent these governments, although they're supportive of green technologies, they don't much care which one it is. And I think we must view these alternative technologies around here as substitutes. Or potential substitutes. These alternate power technologies will be fitted by major international vehicle manufacturers. So yes, you were correct. We were correct. These are the customers here. They are major international vehicle manufacturers. The vehicle manufacturers will need to form a close partnership with any engine producer in order to make the technologies compatible, and this has already begun to happen, with two of the major manufacturers signing deals with other engine makers already. So interesting here, they've signed up already with other engine makers. So these not very pleasant for us, maybe not maybe that pleasant for us. Stokeness's mission is to provide world-leading reduced emission, fuel-efficient power products for the motor industry to optimize shareholder returns. Existed only for 5 years. It's owned by its management and venture capitalists. And remember, there's something in the questioning part C about venture capitalists. Management were all engineers who had been working on the basic research associated with the new fuel technologies and saw the opportunity to commercialize their expertise. It's highly regarded in the industry for its advanced fuel-efficient cell designs. Its advanced efficient fuel cell designs. As a result, the venture capitalists were keen to invest in Stokeness and have assisted by placing experienced managers in the business to aid the original engineering team. I think this is all mainly to do with Part C. It takes 5 to 10 years to develop a viable product for sale in this market. 5 to 10 years is a long kind of development period before you begin getting any revenue. There's going to be a lot of risk associated with that. There's going to be a lot of kind of initial loss making associated with that before you break through, the product life cycle, breaking through and so on. And I would have thought this 5 to 10 years waiting for profits and spending money in R&D without the assurance you're going to get anything back is a considerable barrier to entry. So when we're thinking about new entries coming in, one of the things we're really interested in is what are the barriers to these new entrants. Thus, the VCs have stressed the need to analyze competition and competitive advantage to understand how to make the business profitable in the long term. Okay, so a little bit interesting there in the long term that these VCs here are kind of quite interested in, and that might be relevant to this attitude to risk appetite that the venture capitalists have. A major problem that needs to be overcome with any of these new technologies is that there must be a viable infrastructure accessible to the end users for refueling their vehicles. Governments have indicated a desire to support the development of such technologies and to address environmental issues and to try to establish new high-value industries in the jurisdiction. They may do this through tax breaks and investment to support the development of refueling infrastructure. Not sure anything that's much to do with 5 forces. It might help some new entrants to the market. It might help some substitutes to the market. One of the substitutes was electrical batteries, so you need recharging places and so on. So I suppose this is kind of just easing maybe the passage of substitutes and new entrants in. So we could put that down maybe, put a little question mark here, that substitutes are going to be helped, It's not as though the government has said, no, it's only going to be fuel cells. We can have batteries, compressed air, flywheels, whatever the new technology is going to be. Production of the fuel cells uses a special membrane that requires rare and expensive elements. Also, it is partnered with 2 other engineering firms to subcontract the production of certain components to its fuel cell. This is pretty obviously here supplier pressure. We'll be able to say that it's going to be pretty high. We have a special membrane that may be only made by one person with the expertise. We have partnered with just 2 other engineering firms for the production of certain components there. It's had to share much of its fuel design with these firms to overcome engineering problems. It's kind of stuck with them a little bit, maybe. It probably won't want to share its technology around the place very well. And if the special membrane manufacturer or these other manufacturers, decided to put up that price, then we'd be in a bit of a problem maybe. We'd also want to make sure, I think, that our technology secrets were safe with these suppliers. There are a number of companies developing cells, but Stokeness believes that they have a 2-year lead over them. So I suppose this is to do with competition. So it's developing fuel cells here. It doesn't say how the competitors who are developing batteries and compressed air and so on are getting on. And to some extent, we're getting in, I think, to the middle part of the question, part B, is what is your market? Is our market any sale of alternative technology for powering vehicles, or is our market much narrower than that, and it's only limited to fuel cells? Because by saying it's any manufacturer of engines, even petrol, diesel, fuel cells, batteries and so on, is a very wide market, lots and lots of competitors. If it's just fuel cells and we have a little niche market there, then maybe we're going to have a bit of an easier time, because we are 2 years ahead of that. And it says here also there are a number of startup companies developing other technologies mentioned above. We had that, batteries and so on, as well as large existing diesel and petrol engine manufacturers who are constantly reducing the emissions from their existing engines. The CEO wants to understand the external business environment and its effect on the performance management. She's used Porter's 5 forces. But here she wants it focused on performance management. In particular, she wants your analysis of the current competitive environment to result in advice about the performance management and properly justified recommendation for one performance measure for each of the 5 forces. Stokeness already uses market share to measure its competitive position, but the CEO is worried about the way this is calculated, in particular, what is the market? She's asked for your comments on this, as you are a performance management expert. So I think we have 5 forces. That's good. And what we have to do is to have to assess the impact on the performance management of Stokeness, and also to give a justified recommendation for one new performance measure for each of the 5 forces. In other words, to try to measure its strength. Okay, just in the order in which we came across them then. So, we have got, first of all, customer pressure. And we are selling to only a few large vehicle manufacturers: Ford, General Motors, Volvo, Nissan, Toyota and so on. There's probably 6 to 8 very large manufacturers, they will have a lot of bargaining power and could give us quite a hard time, especially because none of these five forces is entirely separate on its own, but especially as these people, although we are the only supplier of maybe fuel cells, they might prefer to go for batteries or compressed air or something else. There are other products that they could go for. So it'll be quite important, I think, for us to try to get a couple of major manufacturers signed up with this, if only because we might have to justify the infrastructure. So fuel cells, for example, take hydrogen fuel. The government will have to encourage the installation of refueling centres with hydrogen, just as the government would have to encourage battery replacement centres. If we don't get a kind of critical mass there, if we don't get a couple of these people signed up, then it might be difficult for us to persuade the government or other companies to put the infrastructure in. And these people will presumably know that. They will know their bargaining power, and they know our dependence on them. The great thing is, once they are signed up, once a Ford Motor Company is locked into putting fuel cells, our particular technology in there, then we can relax a little bit. But getting these initial orders is going to be very, very important for us. And we want to have this kind of critical mass in the industry. So at the moment, a lot of high buyer pressure, high customer pressure there. How could we measure it? Well, it says one of the things we might be able to do is to look at the number of potential buyers that we have. So if there were 20 vehicle manufacturing companies, that's maybe relatively good news. If they were, expressing an interest in it, if there were only 4 vehicle manufacturers expressing an interest in it, then they've got much more power. We might also measure, when we ask for one performance measurement, we might also measure the number of alternative technologies they could go for. So if ours was by far out the lead, so if our kilometers per dollar, whatever way we're going to measure the performance of these technologies, was like 10 times better than the nearest one, then we will be reducing the buyer power. But I would probably be thinking, because we might look at that for competitors, I would probably be thinking, well, let's measure the number of potential suppliers we have, the number of potential customers we have, and maybe the number of customers we've signed up, and some sort of ratio might be quite good. If we have a majority of the market, then to some extent they're locked into us. What about the substitute products here? We've got substitutes, fuel cells, electrical batteries, compressed gas, and somewhere down here there's something more about substitutes in here. Where is it? Yeah, there are also a number of startup companies developing other technologies mentioned above. There are a number of companies developing fuel cells as well. That is, one must be careful not to mix up competition and substitutes. So let's look at the substitutes. That's what we've come to first. Substitutes: existing petrol, diesel engines, fuel cells. That's electrical batteries, compressed air, and so on. Those are our main substitute products that may pose a threat to us. How would we measure their threat, the strength of this threat? And one way in which we could do it would be perhaps how good they are. What is their cost per kilometre? So if our fuel cells were way better in performance than electrical batteries, that's good. If you can get 500 kilometers out of a fuel cell without refueling, but only 120 kilometers out of a battery, that's good. That keeps these substitutes as also-rans. not something that's likely to kind of emerge into the market immediately as a really powerful imminent competitor. C, we thought here was, this one here rather was to do with part C. Okay, let's go on down to here. It takes 5 to 10 years to develop a viable product for sale. Great, fantastic barrier to entry. We can explain why that is in terms of risk, in terms of a lot of capital required and a lot of know-how as well required to get this development on over 5 to 10 years. What would be a measure of how safe we were in this barrier to entry? Patents. We could measure the number of patents we own compared maybe to the number of patents other people own, and if we have very vital patents, very important patents, this is a way in which we could keep other people out. We could also look at how many years is left in a patent, and as you get nearer and nearer and nearer the expiry of a patent, then of course the threat coming from these new entrants here is going to be that much higher. You see this all the time in the pharmaceutical business. Supplier pressure here, very high. Specialist people, specialist suppliers of this membrane and certain other components and so on there. How could we measure how hard, difficult, intense, dangerous this supplier pressure is? Well, maybe we could look at the number of alternative suppliers. We could maybe also look at the number of potential other customers that supplier has, because there's a mutuality going on here. If we are the only user and they are the only supplier, then we kind of depend on each other. But if they're a kind of monopoly supplier, but of 5 people they can supply to, they could cut us out and still make quite a good living. So number of suppliers probably is what I would be looking at there. Competition. There are a number of companies developing fuel cells, but we are believed to have a 2-year lead over them and to be only 3 years away from a commercial launch. So I would probably think of measuring that. Keep an eye on how many years we think we have got to launch, because these things have got a habit of course, extending as things go wrong. And keep also looking back, how many years are they still behind us? So some sort of difference almost, that, years to launch, less the number of years they have to catch up, would be the sort of performance measure I would be looking at in terms of the competition. How close are they on our heels, really, is what we'd be trying to measure. I think that is done pretty much the 5 forces reasonably. So the little sticky bit here was this one new performance measure, this way of trying to assess how difficult, dangerous, risky these forces are. Discuss, and B here, discuss the problems of defining the market and measuring a market share to apply for Stokeness. And I think all we have to say is, and I've said it already, really, it's only 4 marks. What is their market here? Is their market just new technology? Is their market just fuel cells? Or is their market all engines or power sources for vehicles? Is there a right answer? Well, I'm not sure. And it may well change. It may well change over time, because at the moment when maybe 95% of the market is in petrol and diesel, presumably over time that's going to be declining, and more of the market is going to go towards fuel cells and batteries and so on. At the moment I would say that probably the market is just other new technology. But maybe in 10 years' time, that market will have expanded very much, and the conventional petrol engines, diesel engines will be kind of irrelevant to that. But this will make big differences because your market will define who your competitors are, and your market will define your strength. Generally speaking, if you have a high market share, then you are strong in that market in terms of Boston Consulting Group. Though we don't want to get into BCG too much in this. Assess the risk appetite of venture capitalists and discuss how this might impact on performance measurement in Stokeness. Well, risk appetite of venture capitalists. Who are venture capitalists? What sort of creatures are they here? And it comes from the very title, venture capitalists. Venture capitalists specialize in putting money into new ventures, and they know that a substantial proportion of those will fail. Therefore, the risk appetite of venture capitalists is fairly high. And they do expect, on the ventures that succeed, they're really looking for about a 30% return, 30-40% return, because they need to pay for the ventures that fail. But they're used to dealing with risk. That's their business. These are not people who put money into government stocks or into deposit accounts or something of that sort. These people play for big stakes, and they're perfectly comfortable with that. That's what they prefer to do. Discuss how this might impact on performance and measurement of Stokeness here. And it said up here, where we had this bit about C here, Stokeness existed only for 5 years, owned by its management venture capitalists. It says we're 3 years away, I think it said, before we're going to have a commercial product being available there. And we've got here the venture capitalists who are eager to invest in Stokeness and have assisted in placing experienced managers there. These people know to look for the long term. These people know they're getting into a venture like developing fuel cells as viable alternatives to petrol engines. They're in this for 5, 8, 10 years, maybe before they get much of a return coming through. You only have to think of companies at the moment who are trying to develop fuel cell technology. You've got Nissan Leafs and so on. And they've got Toyotas, one of the Prius was one of the first ones, and so on. They all know it's going to take a long time to get their payback. And venture capitalists here would know that. So, impact on performance measurement at Stokeness. These people are not looking for profits. They're not looking for profits for the first 5 to 10 years. They're not looking for positive cash flow. They know that's not there because it's going to go through research and development. It's spend. It's negative cash flows. And therefore, looking for profits, looking for positive cash flows, looking for a return on capital employed is not something that they are interested in or expecting in the first 5 to 10 years of this project. However, they do want to keep an eye on what's going on. They have appointed people to the board, so they're not ignoring what's going on here. They're eager to invest and to assist in placing specialist managers and so on here. What would they be looking for in terms of something which would indicate good performance? And it could be things like patents. We develop patents, register successful patents. That's a sign of progress, and it keeps other people out, perhaps. They might be interested in customers. What large vehicle manufacturers have expressed a serious interest, or perhaps getting into a collaboration with us? They might be interested in how we're getting on with government. Because the question said that government is keen to encourage this, and we would want to see government keen to put in the refueling depots for fuel cells and the like. So patents, getting those customers, getting those interested, governments getting those interested, and perhaps we would also put up certain what I would call milestones, certain markers that by a year's time we have got a certain piece of technology working. By 3 years' time we've maybe extended the fuel efficiency by 50% and so on there. We're all in the early stages, and profit and positive cash flow is inappropriate. We need other ways of trying to assess progress on this grand venture, and that will be how you would measure performance.